the Dean of the Academy for Jewish Religion, is right now for this term my teacher for Torah.
Nice.
And the operative word is push, as in push yourself. Go beyond what you think you can do. She must have used the word push yourself, oh, maybe 20 times. So I am pushing myself. So you all should push yourself tonight too.
Okay.
But Rob, you're going to go for it because it's conflict of interest.
No. I think that's a fine introduction. You know, she's like I said, she's dean of the academic dean at the Academy of Jewish Religion, pluralistic rabbinical cantorial and graduate school. She's developed curriculum and approaches to Bible pedagogy, and all levels of learning. And her book is Esau's Blessing: How the Bible Embraces Those with Special Needs. Actually, our synagogue has won, I think, awards for its special needs programs for our religious school kids. So that's great. And for those with long memories, she was actually a Joseph Cohen speaker here, I think about 30 years ago. A topic of Bible, may have been Leah, but it was one of our real great programs that we had. So it's not her first time around here. We welcome her back. So without further ado, and without any internet mess ups, we'll introduce Ora Horn-Prouser. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Happy to see some familiar faces. And I do remember being at your shul. It's really a long time ago because I think I was still living in Connecticut. So it's probably more than maybe close to 20 years ago. Could it be? Or
it's probably longer than that. I was trying to figure out who was our rabbi when you were here. So.
I don't remember, but my two connections to your shul, one is here, Bonnie and Steve. That's one connection to your shul. The other, Bonnie, maybe you remember her name, my friend Jane Rubin's mother. I don't remember Jane's maiden name, but she used to live at your shul also. Aleha Hashalom, I think. But I had a very good friend of mine. I mean, I haven't seen her in many years. Mother was part of your synagogue and felt very embraced by the community also. So I've always had a warm feeling about your community. And sorry about the lateness, but I really was here. I just was in the wrong room. But I don't want you to think I am late to joining you. So I'm happy to study together. Do people have a link to a text sheet? Did people get that, or did anyone put it in the chat before I got here?
Yes.
No?
Josh, could you put it in the chat? Is that possible? Thanks.
Let's see. I got that. I also have it. If you ever want to share a screen, I can put it up too.
Well, I'd rather not share screen because I prefer to see the people. And that's why if you put it in the chat, then otherwise I feel like I'm talking to myself, which I'd rather not.
My email is just having some trouble pulling it up, but I'll have it momentarily.
Okay, if you, I'm going to start. We don't need it right away. So I'm going to start. And if along the way you could do it, that would be wonderful. So the topic is about thinking about what is aging in the Bible and issues of aging in the Bible, and specifically thinking about those who are elderly in the Bible. And what does that even mean biblically, right? When we first think about it, I think the first thought is often those ridiculous ages that we see in parts of Genesis, right? This one lives 600 years, this one lives 900 years, this one lives 800 years, right? We're talking, I mean, ridiculous is probably the wrong word, but unrealistic years.
Okay.
And so that's like one thing that I think immediately comes to mind. But in those people with the very long lifespans that are described, those are mostly people that we don't know so much about their lives. A few we do, but mostly don't. And we don't hear about, when they hit 700, they felt old or whatever it is. We don't really hear that. But there are a number of places in the Bible where we do hear about people feeling old or being treated as old. And so can anyone think of examples? Anyone have any thoughts in
David.
your mind?
David.
Good.
They had to bring him
David.
a young woman to warm him up.
Exactly. We're going to really talk about that one. That's a good one. Hold on to it, okay? Because we're getting back to that one. Because how do you not use that one, right? It's that interesting. Who
Does
else
everyone
can you? I'm sorry.
Does everyone have the chat open? The file should be there now.
Yeah, I see it. So that's good. Wonderful. Thank you for your help with that. Who else are there other places you can think of where we think about people in the Bible as being elderly? And if not, it's okay.
Well, Abraham and Sarah. Sarah certainly conceiving after 90.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely an interesting elder issue.
Yes, absolutely. And what's really interesting there is that women, when we hear about women feeling old or being old, and I'm using that on purpose because there are other people who are equal ages who they don't talk about as being elderly. It's generally about childbearing and being past childbearing, whereas men who are feeling old or seeming old, it is more about them losing abilities, whether it's losing eyesight or losing mobility, right? So it's an interesting distinction between the way men are described and between the way women are described, but that's a very good example. How about Moses, right? Moses dies at the age of 120, and we're actually told specifically that he was not affected by age. We're told specifically, Moshe ben 120 shana b'moto, he was 120 years when he died. V'lo chahataino v'lo naslecho. His eyes were as clear as they could be, and he hadn't lost vigor, right? He hadn't lost strength. But when you think about the fact that Moses was 120 years old when he died, and they were 40 years in the desert, so that started his career, right? When he started his leading of the Israelites, he was 80 years old, right? So that's an interesting thing, because when we think about Moses, we don't think about him in those terms. In the movie, he doesn't look like he's 80 years old until afterwards, when he gets affected by, God's whatever. And then suddenly in, the famous movie, that's when his hair turns. Or in Prince of Egypt, which also is a pretty good movie, he doesn't look elderly at all, right? He looks very young, but he's actually 80 years old, a young 80, really good 80. And think about Miriam. Miriam is Moses' older sister, right? So let's say she's 85, just to give a number, right? If Miriam is 85, then imagine her dancing at the shore of the sea, right? The sea opened and they got through, and Miriam led the women in song and dance. And we think about that image a lot, right? We think about Miriam with her timbrel and dancing on the shore, but think of her leading everyone in dance at the age of 85. How beautiful is that? Right? It's a beautiful image, but it's never the image that we see in artwork. It's never the image that we hear about. The image is always this young, vibrant Miriam. But just imagine the beautiful image of Miriam leading the women in song at the age of 85. So the whole biblical view is really quite fascinating and interesting to think about. We have a number of cases where we talk about people with weak eyes, right? We see that a lot, that they're getting older and their eyes weaken. We see a good number of cases of that. But really, the Bible's picture of aging is something that we should look at, because I think it is filled with a lot of different views. So I want to go to text. So the text is in the chat. If you can open it there, is everyone able to open it? And if not, it's okay too, because I'm going to tell the stories. So it's okay if you don't open it, that's fine too, okay? It's just for your own ability, not ability, your own ability.
Yeah, it did not work, the URL, by the way. It did not
It
work.
doesn't work?
No,
Did you see
No.
the file above that? Don't click the URL.
There's a file.
Don't click the
Oh.
URL that Rob posted. Click the file that
How
I.
are we supposed to know that? Thank you.
It says site and
Throw
insight.
in
Go up, go up.
funny thing.
Thanks.
That's fine.
Got it.
Okay, and really the
What are we
text,
Is
supposed
that
to
the file?
do?
Is that the file right here?
There's a file with the Adobe PDF logo. I think if it looks like that on your side.
but bottom line, I'm going to tell the stories. So the text is there for your own use, but it's okay if
Excellent.
if you don't want to use it, that's fine also. So I want to take the time to look at 3 biblical texts. One of them is Isaac on his deathbed, or supposed deathbed. It's actually not his deathbed, when he blesses his sons, Jacob and Esau. One is the David story that was mentioned before, and one is Jacob blessing his sons. So there are 3 different stories, and I want to go through them each one at a time. And like I say, if you have the text in front of you, that's great, but we're not going to read every word anyway. And that's why it's valuable to have the text so that you can look more closely. But let's start with the Jacob and Esau story. So this is Isaac, who, and this is probably one of the more familiar texts that we're going to look at, that we have Isaac is getting old, and that's how he describes himself. And he says that he is aging, and therefore he wants to bless his sons before he dies. So it's him identifying that on his own. Okay, it's not someone else saying, hey, you're aging, and so you need to take care of this. So he intends to bless Esau, and he asks Esau to go and hunt for him and to bring him food, and he'll eat before he blesses him. And Esau runs out to do his hunting. And while Esau is out there, we all know this story, Rebecca dresses her son in goat skin and gives him food to bring to his father and to say, to make believe that he's Esau. And he goes to his father, who is unable to see, and he says, I'm Esau, I brought you the food, so that you'll bless me. And Isaac is confused because the voice sounds wrong. It just doesn't feel right to him. But he goes through with it. He asks some questions, but bottom line, he is convinced, and we'll get back to that. And he blesses his sons. He blesses Jacob, thinking he's Esau. At that point, Esau comes back. He thinks he's about to get his blessing. Instead, he finds out what happens. He's absolutely devastated. Isaac appears devastated as well. Both of them are basically crying and screaming and shaking. And then ultimately, Isaac gives him a different blessing. And that's the basic story. And ultimately, Esau gets angry. Jacob has to run away. And then there's more to it, but that's enough for us. So what's interesting in this text is that Isaac favored Esau. We know that. We're told by the text that his favorite was Esau, just as Rebekah's favorite was Jacob. Esau was the elder, right? So he should have been the one who is blessed. And yet Rebekah knows, because she received an oracle from God, that Jacob is the one who is supposed to carry on the blessing. We don't know that she ever shared that information with Isaac, but we know that she knows. And so the actions she takes are really to enact what God wants to happen, right? What God told her should happen. So there's a bottom line question in this text. Does Isaac know which son he is blessing? Does Isaac really know? We know he can't see. Okay, that we're told, and we understand it, and we know he can't see. But the bottom line question is, does he know what he's doing, or was he actually tricked? Anyone have thoughts on that? Have you studied this text together before? Yeah, please, Stephen.
Actually, I've always felt that Isaac probably was diabetic, and his malady fits with an elderly person with diabetes, the impairment of the vision, his impairment of touch sensation with a neuropathy. He probably had some sort of neurologic malady, and I don't think he really knew what was happening. I think there was probably some dementia there as well, but that may be overreading. But I do think a case can be made that they were describing a diabetic.
Interesting. Thank you. I think it actually totally works with the text to say that he didn't know what he was doing. And whether it's, and I find what you said about the touch very interesting, because that's one of the things, like he should have been able to tell the difference between even his really hairy son and goat skin, right? They're still not the same. So
No,
that's a
you
very
have-
interesting approach.
Yeah, if you have a peripheral neuropathy from diabetes, or even a bad carpal tunnel syndrome from diabetes, you're not
Interesting.
going to feel the difference.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. So that's a totally legitimate approach. Does anyone want to make the case that Isaac did know what was going on?
Sure.
Who's
Up-
talking?
up-
Oh, Steve, thank you.
I'll be a troublemaker. This partial always bothered me. I always thought, like, wow, I mean, that's impossible that he wouldn't know that he's being fooled. He's either going along with being fooled, or yeah. So
Yeah.
it always bothered me, this partial.
And I get it, why it bothers you, because to me, if something is that important and I'm not able to see, I think I would bring someone into the room and ask them. Like, I just don't think I would give away something that valuable without asking someone to help me if I had a question. And we see that Isaac has questions. He doesn't feel secure. He's saying, wait, it feels like Jacob, the voice is the wrong voice, but it said, that he's showing that he's questioning. So I've always thought about it like that. And is the food the same? The food that he's brought is goat as opposed to hunted food. And frankly, I'm a vegetarian, so I don't know the difference, but I am told on good authority that the taste is very different. So there's a lot to be said for saying that Isaac actually did know what was going on. And if he did, how do we understand that? Well, one way of thinking about it, and by the way, this reading is legitimate and the other reading is legitimate, right? We don't have to sit here and argue like our lives depend on it, because I don't believe that there's one right reading. I think the text supports both of these readings. Just as it really supports that Isaac was fooled, I think it also really supports that Isaac was kind of in a situation where his beloved Esau, who is the one who should be blessed and the one that he cares about the most, he actually gets that he should not be the one to carry on the family blessing. But how does he do this without destroying his son? And frankly, I think that Rebecca helped him do it, because she made it a way for Isaac to bless the right one without destroying him, without losing Esau's most important relationship, which is with his father. So you can buy that reading, you can disagree with that reading. I'm fine either way. But the bottom line of it is, I think we have two legitimate readings there. One, that Isaac was old, and I'm going to say not just old, but losing it on some level, and was maybe had some dementia, maybe had just some neuropathy, whatever you want to say. He had something giving him trouble. And so he really missed it. And the other, that Isaac was just right in there, making this happen exactly the way he wanted it to, and the way he could protect his favored son. You see what I mean? There's two readings here. I want to move on. Am I okay? Are we good? Okay. I want to look at another reading. Excuse me, another text, and that is the story of King David that was raised before. I forgot already who said it, but whoever said it, you were right. It's a fascinating text, and this is David on his deathbed, really on his deathbed. Isaac lives a long time, but David really on his deathbed, and he's elderly, and he is cold, and he can't get warm. I mean, what an image, right? Like, if you just think about what an image, the poor guy is just lying there cold, and it doesn't matter how many blankets they put on him, they can't warm him up. I just think that image does it for me. And so, yes, they bring him a young woman to lie with him, to literally warm him up. And we get even another image of how elderly he is, or how not well he is, I should really say, not elderly, but not well, because he can't sleep with her, right? And David did very well with women. So if he can't sleep with her, then he is, you know, showing another place where he is weak. He's in a weakened state. And at that point, one of his sons, Adoniah, decides to anoint himself as king. And his son anoints himself and says he's going to be king, or he might say, I am king. And he has like stuff in public about it. You know, he's making a point in public. And remember that David had many sons, right? A few of them actually killed each other. And one of the ones that was left was Solomon. And Solomon's mother, who was Bathsheba, and one of the prophet/advisors, Natan, came into David and said, don't you remember that you told us that Solomon was going to be the one who's going to be king? You promised that. And here Adoniah just anointed himself. Now, Adoniah was the elder of the brothers. He should have been next in line, right? From a legitimacy point of view. But they said to David, no, 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 you made this promise to us. And they did it. And it's really described as a ruse, right? Natan and Bathsheba get together and say, hey, you go in and say this, and then I'm going to go in and say that, and then we're going to convince David, right? It's described as a ruse. It's not described as, oh, no, we have this promise, and what are we going to do about it? So they went in and they make these statements to David, and David says, oh, okay, so he'll be king. And he anoints Solomon. Adoniah, of course, gets very angry. It leads to more bloodshed. But the question really is, did Natan and Bathsheba, or not the question, but the question for tonight is, did Natan and Bathsheba make David do something he didn't want to do? Or did did David actually control the situation? Did David really get done what he wanted to happen? Right? It's two different views of David. One is David lying there, thank you, Bonnie, impotent, weakened, freezing. Like, we've all been sick. You know, we've all been sick at some point that we couldn't get warm. We know the frailty that brings with it, right? That's one picture of David that's just influenced by whoever is in the room telling him something. And the other is David, who has his reasons why he thinks Solomon should be the next king. And yet Solomon is not the elder, right? Solomon is not the official next in line. And so there is an alternate way that David engages in making sure that Solomon would be king. There's an interesting reading of David and his wives, which I'm not going to go into in great depth, But the bottom line of it is that David had different wives, and he had wives that represented different parts of Israel. At that point, Israel was kind of two sister states held together by, I'm going to say, chewing gum, right? They were held together pretty weakly. And one of the ways David held them together was by creating Jerusalem, which was in neither of these two states, and saying, this is my capital. It's not part of one state and it's not part of the other state. It's other. And the only son that was born of a mother in Jerusalem was Solomon. So there is political logic why Solomon should be the next king. Right? Solomon is the one who politically is the smartest next king, because he's not going to let either one of the two states that are struggling to stay together have be elevated over the other. Are you with me on that? So politically, it makes sense that Solomon should be the next king, but officially, Solomon should not be the next king. Right? It should be Adoniyahu. So how do we read David? And one of the interesting things about it is that after David anoints Solomon, he goes into this elaborate blessing. And it's not just a blessing. I shouldn't even say it that way. It's partly a blessing. And the other part of it is elaborate instructions as what to do based on everyone who's ever wronged him in his life. And here are all the people who have wronged me, and here's what you're supposed to do about them. Right? Detailed, precise memories of things that happened. And David is really not sounding very feeble at all. He is not sounding very sick at all when he gives these instructions to Solomon. So we have two pictures. Is David tricked? Is he a weak person who's tricked? Or is he someone in charge and who is making things happen the way he wants them to happen? He's always been a political animal, right? He's always been good at it. So is he once again politically being wise and intelligent and quick in making sure things happen the way he wants them to? Are we good with those two texts? We're okay? Okay. The third text to look at now, it's Genesis 48. And this one is less ambiguous, because in this story, basically Joseph brings his sons to be blessed by Jacob. And Joseph has these two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Manasseh is the elder, Ephraim is the younger. The one who gets blessed by the right hand should be the older son. And so remember, again, we have Jacob not being able to see well because he's aging or aged. And Joseph sets his sons up so that Jacob's right hand would naturally be on Manasseh and his left hand would naturally be on Ephraim. And Jacob switches his hands. And Jacob consciously switches his hands when he starts to do the blessing. And Joseph says, no, you got this wrong. And Jacob says, no, I actually have it exactly right. Manasseh is good too. Yay, we love him. But Ephraim is the one who gets the special blessing. So here again, now this one I don't see as ambiguous. We're not, sitting here asking the same question. Did Jacob know what he was doing or not doing? No, there's no ambiguity here. Jacob knows exactly what he's doing. But Joseph doesn't assume that Jacob knows what he's doing. You with me? So Joseph looks at Jacob and says, oh, he's elderly, he can't see, he's not thinking, he doesn't know what's going on, he's just acting without knowing what he's doing. But Jacob knows exactly what he's doing. So these are three different texts that relate to a person who is elderly in a position where they are seen one way, right? They are seen as, maybe having dementia or just being very weak or being, not on top of what's going on around them. But it's possible to read them as being incredibly sharp and clear thinking as to exactly what's going on around them and exactly what needs to be done. It's not the only way to read it, but I think it's a legitimate way to read it. We have legitimate readings on both sides. So I guess I would start by taking a minute here and asking you, so how does it affect for your reading, thinking about these texts in this way, whether it's the ones with ambiguity or the one with clarity, when we think about them as a group, how does it impact on your reading of it? Does it raise other questions for you? Or do you find yourself on one side of this argument or another side? And if no one wants to, that's okay too, but I'm leaving an opening.
I think I like the way you frame the potential ambiguity. So to live with that ambiguity, I tend to be someone who just reads it and has an opinion, and that's it. And so it's nice to hear that there's two ways to look at it.
Yeah, that happens a lot in the Bible. And it's part of what makes the Bible great, right? That there is so much richness, that places where we can go. Absolutely. Thank you. Any other thoughts or questions?
I've always liked Rebecca.
Yeah.
And I think that Rebecca, in doing what she did, I think she knew that she would lose her son.
Yeah.
And I think that that was her akedah, that she had to willingly make a choice, knowing who Esau was and that he was an angry kind of a person, and that she was going to have to send Jacob away, and that would be, her child. She was going to lose her child while her husband got to keep his. So I see that as a sort of tragic part of the story.
I so agree with you. I think it's a moment of great sacrifice, where and what the way I'm more of a fan of Esau. I find him to be an incredibly appealing character. I don't know that he was always angry. I think he was just not the one to get the blessing.
Rabbis that commented.
Yes, the rabbis absolutely made mincemeat out of him, but the biblical text itself doesn't. So I feel that Rebecca, in essence, she has the son who she loves more, right? The text tells us that. We're not just imagining it. And she basically sacrifices her future with her son that she loves more in order to protect, that's how I see it, in order to protect Esau, because she managed to have Esau not get the blessing, but still maintain his feeling of love from his father. Whereas if Isaac had to say, listen, Esau, look, I really care about you, but you just are not blessing material. If Isaac had to say that, how devastating that would be for Esau. But this way, there is a, what do you call that? When plausible deniability, right? This way, there's plausible deniability that Isaac can say, I would never say that to you. I wanted you to be the one, but I was tricked, right? So I agree with you, Bonnie. I really see it as an act of love of a mother with great sacrifice to herself. I totally agree with you. And it's very moving, and it's valuable to think about that, because so many people just get angry at Rebecca and just see her as, when you read in literature, she's manipulative, she's conniving, like people have all this language, and I actually see her as loving and strong and doing what she knows God wants and still protecting her family. I think there's like some real beauty there. So thank you for bringing it up.
Can I say, I still remember the time when I was reading one of the footnotes, and it was in an older Chumash, and, Rebecca is spoken to. She's spoken to in the womb. And I don't know, it's Sforno or somebody said, oh, no. She didn't get spoken to. It was, Isaac that was spoken to, and then he told her that. And that was like 20 years ago. It just enraged me, because she was spoken to in the text. She's spoken to.
Yes.
She knows.
Yes. She gets the message from God. And she initiated it. It's not just that she gets the message from God. She is the one who says, I'm having major trouble here. I'm going to go to God to ask for help. Right? So like she initiates the conversation. So it's beautiful. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So if we are looking at this bigger picture, what we see, I think, is so interesting, because is anyone here Lord of the Rings people? Anyone a Lord of the Rings fan? Right. So I didn't remember to look up the guy's name beforehand, but the king in who's under the influence and he has no power and then he gets his power back. What's his name? I forget his name. Anyway, the king who is sitting there with no strength, no power. He can't, his face has no emotion. He barely can speak. And it's because he was under this influence, and then they get the influence away, and suddenly he's alive and well and, able to lead his people. In essence, it's like I see both of those images at the same time in these biblical texts. I see that you can see these people, these three specifically, as appearing like they have nothing left and they are just, not really present in the world. And on the other hand, they are just directing what is going on, and they look one way, but they are on top of things. And I think there's something so beautiful in that, because it's really saying, number one, don't judge people, right? Don't assume that someone who has lived a certain number of years no longer is actively in charge of their lives and able to think bigger and creatively, right? It really, I think, is a message not to think that way about people. And it's a sense of, I think it raises an extra question of who's being fooled, right? Is the elderly person being fooled, or actually is the reader being fooled? Right? Are the people around them being fooled? And are we, the readers, being fooled, that we are led to look at people one way and then suddenly we're like, wait a minute, that's not what's going on here. And in a way, it's like a great jolting surprise when we rethink these texts and say, no, just because David is not feeling well doesn't mean he is not still totally directing the future of his kingdom. He's on top of it. He's making sure the right person politically becomes king. So I think there's a beauty to the ambiguity, but even more, I think there's a beauty to the being fooled. There's a beauty to our being sucked into looking at one thing and lulled into seeing a caricature, and then realizing that we're wrong. And the fact that we think someone's a caricature is like wrong of us. You know, like we have to rethink our way of thinking that we got so lulled into seeing a caricature. You with me? So I want to take one more step from this, if that's okay. We're good so far? We're okay? Okay. So what I always like to do in thinking about the Bible is that I basically always feel that whatever we see in people in the Bible, we see in God in the Bible. And when I say that, I'm talking about the view of God in the Bible. I want to be really clear. I'm not talking necessarily about when we think of God, who is that God? And it's not that I believe in more than one God. I want to be really clear. There's not more than one God, but there is a biblical view of God, which may not be exactly the same as our view of God, right? So I just want to be clear on that distinction. And what I'm talking about right now is the biblical view of God. So when we think about aging in the Bible, the two things that seem to appear the most have to do with eyesight and mobility. That there are issues with mobility and there are issues with losing ability to see, whether it's becoming blind or just being just having more difficulty seeing, right? It's not clear that it's total blindness. And so how do we fit thinking about God into that? So I want to look for a minute at Psalm 23, which is a psalm many people are familiar with. We often say it in times of mourning or in funerals and other times like that. And it should be familiar. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, right? Everyone knows what it is. One of the verses in it is, though I walk through the valley of deepest darkness, I know it's normally translated shadow of death, but deepest darkness is a better translation. I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And that's it's a very pastoral image of God as shepherd. And God has a shepherd's crook or whatever they're called, right? And that helps lead the sheep, excuse me, right? And it's protective and it's strong and leading and in charge. But when you look at the Hebrew for the words, it's shiftecha or mishantecha, your rod and your staff. But mishantecha actually is a mishenet, and a mishenet is something that you lean on. It doesn't have to mean a shepherd's staff. It's a stick that you lean on. And a stick that you lean on is a cane. So, shivtecha umishantecha hema yinachamuni, it could be translated, your rod and your cane, they comfort me, which brings the image of God needing to use a cane. You with me? It's a little bit provocative, but I think in a good way. It gives the image that God at times needs to use a cane to get around. And what I love is the Hema Yenachamuni. There's an element of they comfort me. I am comforted by the idea that using a cane is in God's image. And there's something beautiful about that, right? That using a cane is not against nature. It is absolutely another piece of God's image, because the image of God here, right here in this verse, can be of God walking with a cane, which means that we have a picture of God losing mobility. And that's different than God in, let's say, the Garden of Eden, where God is just like taking a walk in the garden and walking around. And it's very, we have these images of God as being very mobile. And I want to be clear that any picture of God we have in the Bible is this much of God, right? And all we see at a time is this much at a time, because there are so many images of God. We can't even conceive of all of them. So when I say that there's an image of God using a cane, there's also an image of God walking well. There's also an image of God soaring through the air, right? All of those images exist. It's not that God uses a cane all the time. I want to be really clear. But it does mean that one element that we see in aging in the Bible, which is loss of mobility, we also see in one of God's images. You with me? We're okay? Okay. There's another image, right? Which is the weak eyesight. So there's a really interesting book by a man named John Hull that is about a blind person's way of reading the Bible. And what he says is that there are whole sections of the Bible that make sense to him as a blind person. Take a look at towards the end. I'll read it out loud in case people don't have it. In Psalm 97, 1-2, which is on the sheet. The Lord is king, let the earth exult, the many islands rejoice. Dense clouds are around him. Righteousness and justice are the base of his throne. Dense clouds are around him. Anan ve'arafel svivav. God is surrounded by a dense darkness that can't be penetrated. When John Hull, a blind person, reads that, he says that's how it feels to be blind. Another verse is in Psalm 139, Gam choshech lo yachshich mimcha. Darkness is not dark for you. Night is as light as day. Darkness and light are the same. And he said there too, that is how it feels to be blind. That day and night feel the same. Darkness and light feel the same. So when this man reads these verses, he says, to me, it sounds like God is blind. Now, I don't remember how he says it, but the way I would interpret what he's saying. So I'm not saying that John Hull says this, but in my view, it's not saying that God is always blind, or it's just saying that another one of these little slivers of images of God that we have is of God having difficulty seeing. So it means that we take the two images of God, the two images of aging in the Bible, which are not so different from images of aging today. I mean, there are more images of aging, but loss of mobility and loss of sight are pretty, they work today too as images of aging or things that people deal with as they age. Those two images we have expressed about God as well. So what I love about that is when we talk about B'Tselem Elohim. B'Tselem Elohim means being in God's image, and all of us are in God's image. Then what I love in seeing all these images in God is that it doesn't matter where you are or in your life. It doesn't matter what you do, what you're experiencing, that too is part of being in the image of God. And so it is in the image of God when we are feeling fully able in every way physically, and we are in the image of God when we are struggling physically in different ways. And both of those are in the image of God. Not that we are losing something and no longer have our God-given abilities, but that this too is part of living in God's image. And so I think the Bible gives us this very beautiful, broad approach to understanding aging in the Bible. And what we see is, on the one hand, we see people dealing with very real issues, normal issues that people deal with as we age. We also see people who may appear to be not in control of things, who are absolutely in charge of everything they're doing. So we also see the warning not to put people in categories and not to make assumptions about people that are not warranted. And we also see that at every stage of our lives, from the time that we are young and through all the parts of our lives as we age, every part of that is living in God's image. And every step of the way, from everything we're doing, everything we're imagining, everything we're experiencing bodily, all of that is living in God's image. And I think so the Bible is telling us, on the one hand, there's real stuff, and on the other hand, that Jacob knows what he's doing. We can see Isaac know what he's doing. We can see David know what he's doing. And we can see Miriam leading the women in dance at the age of 85. And I think it's a beautiful, it's a beautiful way of thinking about humankind, and a beautiful way of thinking about the great arc of our lives that is valuable and important at every step of the way. So thank you. I am open to questions or thoughts or comments, or not, because people are probably tired, but please, yeah, Rob.
Yashkar.
Thank you.
Yashiko, that was great. I was thinking about, I'm an optometrist, so I deal with people whose eyesight changes as they get older. And to me, that's such a great marker, a brilliant marker to use of passing of years. You know, no matter how healthy you are, somewhere around 40, your arms remind you you're getting older because they get too short to read. It's just, you could look like you're 20, you're still going to have that change. Somewhere around 65, you're going to develop a cataract. No matter how well you take care of yourself, your eyes get dim, or whatever phrases they used. And, you know, so again, that's more the miraculous thing, that you got Miriam and Moses, you know, not being dim of sight is very powerful image, you know, if you just in terms of understanding the aging process. So I really enjoy that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, I should be clear, the text doesn't say that Miriam didn't lose her sight.
Okay.
The text tells us that Moses didn't lose his sight, but we can think that about Miriam if we want to, because she did a really good job of dancing and leading people in song. So I'm game. But thank you. I get what you're saying. As someone who just turned 60 and who's been wearing glasses since I was 9, I get it.
And these people would have had to wait another like 2,000 years to get glasses. You know, so.
Exactly. Any other comments, ideas? Good.
I mean, I think, you know, being, so whenever we talk about anthropomorphism, it always sort of bothers me, because I don't like the anthropomorphic vision of God, but I like the metaphoric value of it just there. And I think, you know, I think, you know, that what a lot of people do is they'll see someone who's old and they'll just go, oh, that's an old person, or that's this person. And I think what this text and the studying is saying is, no, that's just not right. Right. And if I had, you know, so many times in my life, my computer doesn't, so many times in my life, I've seen someone and my brain has said, oh, that's like that. And I've been completely wrong, and completely wrong. So I've learned over the years to stop that, hopefully, right? But I think this is a really great teaching. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. You know, it's interesting. As you heard, I'm from the Academy for Jewish Religion, and we're a pluralistic school, and which means we have a very diverse population. People come from, you know, diverse in many different ways, which I don't have to go into, but in a beautiful way. And what I always say, and I believe with all my heart, is that everybody tends to put other people in a box, but nobody wants to be put in a box. Like, it's easy for us to put other people in a box. It makes it easier to think about the world. And we just kind of label people, even if we're not doing it consciously, we just kind of do it. and we say, oh, you're someone who went to this school, so you believe that, or, you know, whatever it is, we make these boxes. And it in some ways it makes our lives easier, right? It's like easier than being open to everyone being unique. But nobody wants to be put in that box. Like you yourself, I don't mean you, but like every one of us, me, right? We all know that we don't belong in those boxes, that, yeah, we come from X place, but they all said this and we disagreed with it. And we, you know, went to this school, but we didn't, you know, whatever it is. We never want to be put in those boxes. And so, you know, there's a lesson in there. Like if we don't want to be put in those boxes, we don't want to put other people in those boxes, right? And it makes it more interesting and harder, both. Well, I just want to say thank you. And it was really nice studying with you. And you have a really nice community. And I'm sorry, did someone want to say something? Did I miss someone? Maybe not. Okay, so I just want to say thank you so much, and thank you to Bonnie for making the shidduch for me to come join you.
A yenta. Always been a yenta.
Or I'll just say one last thing. I love the way you love Torah.
Oh. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And I have parts I don't like. Right. So, you know, someone would put me in the box and say, well, she loves it so much, she connects with everything. The answer is no, I really don't. I try to make meaning out of everything, but you know, so it's that same. But yes, I do love Torah. There is reality there. That box I'm okay being put in.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Bye.
And I'll
Thank
see you
you
on
so much,
Wednesday.
Thank you so
everybody.
much. That
I
was
will see you,
wonderful.
Bonnie.
Oval.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.